Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mariela Salinas, and I am a digital marketing specialist here at United Training. Welcome to today's webinar, Advanced Excel for Professionals. We are using the GoToWebinar platform for today's session, and we will be sharing a copy of this recording with you. We do encourage participation throughout the webinar, so please use the questions options in your GoToWebinar dashboard if you have any at all. United Training is excited to present this webinar today. I'll now hand it over to you, Joseph.
All right, thank you. So welcome everyone. Today we're going to be taking a look at some advanced Excel tips here for professionals. So there's a few different things that we will be looking at. There's just a few tips that I found really helpful to be able to use in Excel. Some of these you might be aware of, some of these you might not be as aware of. Now the idea is that we're just going to take a look at these tools and I'm going to kind of show you how they work. Like we said, any questions you have, you can type in there and then I should be able to answer some of those questions at the end here. Now, we're not going to have time for you to become an expert on each of these tools, right? The idea is I just want to show you that they're there. And you can always come back to the recording later and kind of play around with these tools. But I want you to be aware that these tools exist and kind of know how to access them and explore them if they are tools that you think might be helpful for you. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first one. And this is something called data validation. And you may or may not know what that is or have used that before. Data validation is when we restrict what type of data is allowed in a cell or a group of cells. And there's a few different ways that we can do this and that it can be useful for us. So let's go ahead and take a look. So I've got a spreadsheet up here, okay? And you'll notice up at the top here, we have an employee ID number, okay? And under that, we have the employee name and the employee phone extension number. Now, for the employee ID up here, every time we change this number, it's going to tell us the name and extension for that employee. So I'll show you up here right now, it's got employee 1001. I'm going to type in here 1002. And as soon as I press enter, you'll see that the data changes for the name and extension. This is what we call a VLOOKUP. We're going to talk more about lookup functions in a few minutes here. So we don't need to worry about how this is working. What I want to show you here is how we can use data validation to create a drop-down menu for the employee IDs. So you'll notice I can manually type in the number, right? 1005 and press enter. But let's say that we want to have just a drop-down menu that we can click on and see all of the different employee ID numbers in here, rather than having to type them in every single time. So what we would do is we would click on the cell that we want to put the drop-down menu on, right? So for me here, it's right here in B1 for that employee ID. And we're going to go up to our data tab. And when we click on the data tab up here at the top, we're going to see that we have a button for data validation. Okay, data validation. So click the data tab, come over to data validation. And when I select that, it pops up with this data validation window. And I can see that right now it's allowing any value. Anyone can type anything into that cell. They could type an incorrect employee ID number. So data validation is going to allow us to restrict that. And we're going to create a drop-down menu. So what I'm going to do is click right where it says allow, and I'm going to change it from any value. So I'm going to click that drop-down menu, and we're going to change it to a list. Okay, so we go to our allow drop-down menu, and we're changing that to a list. Now, when we're going to use a list, it needs a source. Okay, obviously it needs to know what is the list that we can pull from. So our source is going to be all of these numbers. You could type them in manually, but that's going to be a little bit tedious for us because we've got a longer list. So I'm going to click down into where it says source. And once we come down to source, I'm just going to select all these employee ID numbers. There's different ways you can do that. You can click and drag. I'm just going to select the first one and do one of my favorite keyboard shortcuts, which is Control-Shift-E. down. I don't know if you've ever used that one before, but it allows me to select all the way down that list there. So I'm going to click that first one, do Control Shift down, and you can see that it's selecting A6 through A55. Okay, again, you could just click and drag to do that as well. So I have all of those numbers selected, and that's going to be where my list comes from. So we changed where it says allow to list, and then our source, we made A6 through A55. Now I'm going to go ahead and press OK. Now that I've selected that data validation, and we've turned that on here, when we click on the cell, B5, oh, computer wanted to freeze up for a second there. There we go. Now I can click this drop-down menu, and there we go. We've got our list of employee IDs. So I can click down here to 1008, and it will immediately switch that over. Now, when you have a drop-down menu, can you still type those numbers in? Absolutely. With a long list like this, it might be easier for me to type it in. Okay, so I could just type in 1001. And as long as what I type is on the list, then I'm good to go. However, if I type something that's not on the list, let's say I type in the number 10 and press enter, I'm going to get an error message. Okay, so data validation restricts what's allowed to be typed in the cell. And because we used a list, we're also getting that drop-down menu for the list in there. Okay, so that's one way that we can use data validation. You don't have to do a drop-down menu. Let's say that over here for our extension column, column F, let's say we just want to make sure that no one types in a number that isn't an extension, which is 4 digits and starts with the number 4. So you don't have to do a drop-down menu. We could select column F, go back to our data tab, select data validation, and from allow, instead of choosing list, we could just choose whole number. And we could set it up so that it's a whole number between 4,000 and 4,999, right? Because we just want to make sure that it's a 4-digit number, starts with the number 4, right? So we could set it up that way and press OK. And now, if someone were to go in and maybe they mistype a number, something like that, when they press enter, it's not going to accept their number. Okay, they would have to type something in that fit the parameters that we set in there. Now, with data validation, you can change the pop-up menu that they see. Notice if I try to type in a number that's outside of the parameters, it just says that this doesn't match the data validation restrictions, which might not be very helpful. It's like, well, okay, but what are those restrictions? So if you're working with a worksheet that you're sharing with other people and you want to use something like this, when you go up to that data validation button, notice there's an error alert tab. And if I click over to the error alert tab, I can type in an error message in here. That's, let's say, 4-digit numbers that start with 4 only. Okay, you don't have to give it a little title in here. We can throw one in there if we want to. There we go, just to kind of see what it looks like. So now if someone types in a number that doesn't fit our parameters, they're going to get that error message that actually tells them what's going on in there. Okay, so that's data validation in the data tab. One other thing I want to bring up, that when you click on data validation, when you go to that error alert tab, you can change it from the stop style to warning or to information. The difference being that it's defaulting to stop, which means they cannot type in an incorrect number. But if I were to grab that column and change it to warning, now when they try to type in an incorrect number, it will tell them that that's outside of the data validation parameters, but they can say continue and choose yes to actually put that invalid data in there. So depending on what your needs are, you can play around with that error alert and the type of alert that they get in there and how that works. If you want to find invalid data on your worksheet, you can go to your data validation drop-down arrow and select circle invalid data. And it's going to look through your worksheet there, and it will pop up and circle any invalid data. Then you just go to the data validation dropdown and clear validation circles. Okay, so we've got a couple different options in there when we're working with that data validation. All right, so let me go ahead and pull up here. That's it for our data validation. Again, that's found in the data tab. Next, we're going to take a look at the scenario manager. This is another tool that we have access to in Excel. Now, this might not be something that everyone would use on a daily basis, but it's really great. The reason I want to show it is because I love it for any time you have more of a complex scenario that you're looking at. So for instance, kind of what if questions. Well, what if this happened? What if this number changed? What if this increased a little bit? And I know that might sound a little bit vague, so let's take a look at an example in here. Let's say I'm going to click over to a new worksheet here. Let's say we're trying to predict some different expense numbers in here, some revenue, and we're trying to figure out what would happen if certain numbers increase or decrease in here. Okay, so you can see we've got revenue from different countries with a total. Then we've got expenses, salaries, rent, things like that. And then we've got our grand profit total down here at the bottom. So I might be preparing for a meeting where we need to talk about, well, what if all of our sales go up? Or what if they go down? Or what if they go up in this country, but they go down in this other country, right? So that can get a little bit complex. And I do not want to have to set up a bunch of formulas to figure all of that out, right? That's going to be very tedious and time consuming and really easy to make mistakes. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to go to our data tab, and in the data ribbon here, we have a what if analysis drop-down menu. And from that drop-down menu, there's an option for a scenario manager. And the scenario manager is going to allow us to set up different scenarios that we will be able to bounce back and forth between. So let's take a look here. So again, data tab, what if analysis drop down, and then we're selecting scenario manager. It pops up, there aren't any scenarios yet, so I have to add my first scenario. So I click that add button. Now, a tip, you always want to keep your original numbers in here as a scenario. So the first one I'm going to do is original, so that I don't lose these numbers. Okay, my original numbers here. Now, often one of the most confusing parts is, what does changing cells mean? Changing cells means which cells are you going to be tweaking? Which numbers are you going to be tweaking? I'm not going to tweak my totals because those are formulas. So where it says changing cells, I'm going to grab all of the other numbers that aren't totals. And when I select those cells, those are my changing cells. Okay, so this is just my original scenario. So I'm going to press OK, and it's going to ask me which numbers do I want to change. I'm not going to change any yet. Okay, so I'm going to leave them as they are because this is my original. So I'm just going to press OK, and there we go. I have my first scenario, which just says original, which has all these numbers as they are. Once I have my original scenario, then I'm going to go in and create as many other scenarios. What if this happens? What if that happens? And I can set them each up as a separate scenario, and then I can bounce back and forth between them. I can compare them. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like in here. Okay, so I'm going to come down. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new one, right? So I'm going to press that add button. So when I click on add, it's popping up with a new scenario option for me. And for this one, we're going to say that we're going to run an advertising campaign here. I'll just call it advert campaign. There we go. So we're going to say, okay, next year we're running this big advertising campaign. And what would happen if we increased our advertising budget and then all of our revenue in each country went up by 10%? Okay, now I'm going to leave a comment down here, and I'm going to type in the comment exactly what this scenario is going to do. I suggest doing this if you use the scenario manager. It really helps you keep track of which scenario is which and what those scenarios are doing. So I've typed in my comment exactly what I want the scenario to show, and then I'm going to tweak the numbers, okay? So I gave it the name. Notice I left the changing cells the same. They already had it in there. But if not, you're selecting those cells that with the numbers that you want to tweak, and then I put in my comment. Once I press OK, it's going to come in slowly, but oh, you know what? Let me see if there we go, popped up behind my screen. So once I press OK, it appears here, and now it's going to ask me to make changes to those different numbers. Now, there's a couple different ways that I can do this. I could just type in a different number if I wanted to, right? So I could just type in, 100,000, or I can use formulas. So what's ever going to make it a little bit easier for me, I'm going to use formulas. So I'm going to say if each of these increases in here by 10%, right? So to turn them into a formula, I'm going to put equals in front of them, right? So I'm going to throw that equals symbol in front of each of these numbers and then simply turn it into a formula. To do a 10% increase, I'm going to multiply it by 1.1. So I'm doing equals at the beginning, and then I'm doing asterisk 1.1, which will multiply it in here by 1.1. I'm just going to copy that down here for all of those real quick. So it's going to take my original numbers and multiply them by 10%. Now remember, we also said we're going to increase the advertising budget to 40,000. So yes, our revenue is hopefully going to go up, but let me scroll down here to find my advertising budget, which was 40,000. I'm going to switch that to 30 or to 40,000 from 30. Okay, so you can tweak the numbers and just type in a new number, or you can turn them into formulas. So I've done both here. And now we want to see, okay, what happens? Are we going to come out on top, or is that going to make us lose money? So I can go ahead and press OK. And I always cringe when I see these pop up, right? I'm like, oh no, what did I do wrong? You'll get this warning pop up. Don't worry about it. It's just telling you if you had formulas in there, they're converted to values. So I press OK. And now I have my second scenario, the advertising campaign. So right now we're looking at the original numbers, and we can see that our grand total profit is 179,000. Well, what happens if we run the advertising campaign? So I click on advertising campaign and I select show. And when I click on show, look at that. We're making 258,000. So it definitely brings us up on top. So you see how all of those numbers changed, right? That's why we kept the original. So now I can click on original and show the original scenario, and it goes back to the original numbers. Now, we don't have time to do a bunch of these, but you can see how this could potentially be very helpful, because I could set up another one, right? What if our numbers go up in Australia, but they go down in Canada? So I could keep pressing add and creating different types of scenarios, and it's going to make it so much easier for me to bounce back and forth between them. If I want to compare two of these scenarios, we have a summary button in here, and I can select summary. And let's say I want to do a summary. We'll do all of our totals in here. I'll just grab those cells. You could just leave it at the default as well and press OK. And now it gives me a little summary comparison where it puts the numbers next to each other in here. Okay, and it creates a whole new worksheet called scenario summary for that. So that's our scenario manager. Again, to find it, you go to your data tab, what if analysis, and then scenario manager. Notice after you close it, when you bring it back up, it still has the scenarios you've set up in there. So like I said, I like this for presentations. I could present different scenarios in here and just bounce back and forth between the different scenarios that I've created. And once you practice it and kind of get the hang of it, you could create them even during a presentation. Say, okay, let's see what if this happened once you kind of get comfortable with that. Okay, so that is it for our scenario manager. The last tool I want to show you here that we're going to take a look at is the XLOOKUP function. Now, this is a tool that is available in Excel 365, which is the newest version of Excel. So if you have an older version of Excel, just beware. If you're looking for XLOOKUP and you don't find it, it might be because you have an older version of Excel. But if you have Excel 365, Office 365, or if you're using Excel through your web browser, OneDrive or SharePoint, something like that, you'll be able to use the XLOOKUP function in there. And the XLOOKUP function is an extremely versatile lookup function that combines a lot of our other lookup function capabilities. So if you are used to using VLOOKUPs, HLOOKUPs, the index function, XLOOKUP can really replace a lot of those. It's one of my favorite tools in Excel. It is a little bit more advanced. It might look a little bit overwhelming. If you first try to set one up, you're like, okay, what do all these mean? So I'm just going to do a kind of real quick crash course here in the XLOOKUP function. So let's jump over. So let's take a look at something that we might use it for. And I've done the examples already so we can see what it can do, and then we can kind of take a look at how to set it up. One thing that the XLOOKUP function is great for is having multiple return cells, so a return array. Notice we have employee ID here, and we are able to look up the first name and the last name all with one function. You used to have to set up multiple different functions, one for each column. But now all we have to do is I can switch my employee ID, and boom, it's going to give me the first name and the last name, all with one simple function. Okay, so let's take a look at what it is. Like I said, I already have the function set up in here. So if you've never used it before, one way that you can get to your function argument window is this FX button to the left of your formula bar. This is like a magic little trick that I want to show you here. So if I'm clicking on the cell that has a lookup function, and if you click the FX button to the left of the formula bar, it pops up in this function argument window. I love the function argument window because it gives you a breakdown of what's going on in your function, and you can work right in here in this window. So you can see that we have these first three items are filled out for the XLOOKUP function: the lookup value, the lookup array, and the return array. The lookup value is K2. So it's looking for this employee ID in cell K2. So whatever employee ID we plug in there, that's what it's looking for. The lookup array is where are we looking for that employee ID. Notice it says C through C. That means it's looking through all of column C for that employee ID. To do that, you don't have to type C through C. What I would do if it was blank is just click right on the letter C at the top of the column, and then boom, it plugs it right in. Then we have return array, and that's A through B. So that's the great thing about the return array, is that it can be more than one column. So what we're telling it to do is look for that employee ID, and then we're grabbing columns A and B, and it's showing up as A through B. And then when we press OK, it's going to throw those right in there in both of those columns for us. So even though the formula, that function, is only in column L, the result is spilling over into this second column in there. So that's a really simple one. Notice we didn't use the last two fields. You don't have to. You only have to fill out the first three, as long as you're doing something simple like this. So that's one great way to use the XLOOKUP function. There's some other ways we can use it as well. I'll show you an example here for a wildcard example. If you haven't used wildcards before, wildcards are when, you see how I have this asterisk here? Let's say that I know we have an employee known as Don. I'm not sure, is his full name Donald, or is it just Don, or does he go by Donnie? So I can type in Don with an asterisk, and notice it's pulling up Donald Meyer. Or I can type in, let's see, another one. I think Al might be one that's in here. So I can type in Al with an asterisk, and there we go. Alice pops up. She might go by Al, right? So let me pull up the XLOOKUP function here for this one. And what I did for this one that I want to show you in here is we have a match mode of number 2, and we'll talk, the match mode is what type of match you want it to be, okay? And so notice that our lookup array, it's looking in column A. So it's looking for our partial search. The lookup value is Al with an asterisk, right? The lookup array is column A through A. So it's that whole column A. So it's looking for Al, and it's returning all of that data from A through E. The reason it's finding Alice is because we have the asterisk in there. If we take away the asterisk, it's going to say not found. It's not going to be able to pull it up, right? Because it says there's no one in here named Al. Well, we say, well, yeah, I know, but that's the beginning of someone's name. So we put in that asterisk in there, and then it pulls it up. Okay, so you can use a wildcard in here for those. The XLOOKUP function is great for comparing. So you could compare this list of employees to a list of employees on a different worksheet. And to kind of pull up real quick what that would look like is your lookup array can be a different worksheet. So it's my return array worksheet. It's looking at that list from the other worksheet and pulling those right in here, okay? You can even use the XLOOKUP function, and I'll just pull up real quick. Again, you guys are going to be able to come back and watch this video, so I know I'm kind of jumping through here. You could set it up by actually putting an XLOOKUP function inside of the return array. So it's an XLOOKUP within an XLOOKUP. Now we're getting really advanced, right? But if you do that, you could do something like this, where you're looking up models and prices. So every time I switch the product, the price updates. Every time I switch the model, it updates in here, okay? So there's a lot of versatility, a lot of different things that our XLOOKUP function has the ability to do. So again, I know it's more advanced. It does take a little bit of practice to get used to, but I want you to know that it's out there and it's available if you do have Excel 365, Office 365, right? You'll be able to use that. So those are my three sort of advanced tips for you there: data validation, scenario manager, and the XLOOKUP function. These are all things that we cover in depth in our Excel 365 Part 3 class. So it's just kind of a little taste, a little idea of what is in there for us. All right, we've got a few minutes here. Does anyone have any questions on any of those? Or maybe you've typed them in already, so I'll kind of answer a few questions, hopefully, here.
Yeah, we got a couple actually. So,
All right.
from Leland, they're asking scenarios are used for predictive analysis.
Yep, yep, that's exactly right. So that when we use that scenario manager in there, when we're trying to make predictions, right? You'll see there's actually a couple more under what if analysis that we didn't have time to go over. If you had a we were saying what would happen if, what happens if this price goes up, this price goes down. If you were trying to get to a specific thing, how do we make $100,000? You could use something like the goal seek tool under what if analysis. So yep, scenario manager is saying what happens if these numbers change. Goal seek would be how do I get to a specific number? Yep, great question.
Awesome. We have another question regarding Scenario Manager. Does Control Z revert all the changes done with Scenario Manager?
Oh, that's a great question. Let me jump back over to my scenario manager here. So let me pull that back up. So if you don't know what Control Z is, that's undo, right? So we're talking about the undo tool here. So let's say I go to my advertising campaign and I click show on that. And let me close out of it here. If I come up to my undo, you'll see that, actually I'll show you like this. You'll see that it does undo the show, right? So if you do Control Z or you press your undo button, it will undo that. So if you show one and you think, shoot, I never saved my original scenario. How do I get back to it? Yes. If you realize right away, you can just use Control Z or click that undo button to go back to it. Great question. Yep, you didn't lose the data per se.
Awesome. We have a couple more regarding the XLOOKUP. When you put in AL asterisk, why did it only show one name? Was it set for that?
That's a very good question. So let me go. Which one was that? Wild card. So it's only showing me Alice. And notice Alvin isn't popping up. That's probably what you were noticing in there, right? So that this is a limitation if you're trying to use the wildcard like this, because if you have multiple, it's only finding the first one. It's starting at the top of the list, and it says, oh, found it, and it's giving me Alice. It's not giving me the rest of those in there. There are a couple different ways that you could work with it. We don't have time to kind of go in all of those. One that's not super elegant or great, but in a pinch, a really simple way to fix this is going into my XLOOKUP and changing where the top of it. So if I say, okay, I don't want Alice, I could change it so that it starts with the next item. And now it's going to pull through and it's going to find Alvin. But again, it's only finding the next one. So that's a good point to be aware of. When you set it up like this at kind of that basic level, it's only going to find that first one. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And what is a way to understand the difference between VLOOKUP and XLOOKUP?
Good question. So if you've ever used the VLOOKUP function before, let me just pull it up here real quick. The VLOOKUP is only looking, it's just more limited, basically. The VLOOKUP can only look to the left columns, right? So when you're looking it up, notice it says looks for a value in the leftmost column. So it can only look to the left. XLOOKUP can look in all directions. It can't do, it's going to be vertical. It's not going to be a horizontal lookup. So you'd have to go and use the HLOOKUP instead. So to answer the question, the XLOOKUP can basically do everything the VLOOKUP can do and more. What Microsoft was trying to do is say, hey, we've got the VLOOKUP, we've got the HLOOKUP, we've got the index function. Can we make one lookup function to kind of do all of that functionality in there? So if you're already using VLOOKUPs, you don't have to switch over to the XLOOKUP. If the VLOOKUP is doing what you need it to do, you don't necessarily need the XLOOKUP. The XLOOKUP's just more versatile. It has more things that it can do. So the VLOOKUP still exists. It's still there. You can still use it. If it's working for you, that's great. But when you need some of these extra features, that's what the XLOOKUP is great for.
Perfect. And one more question, it looks like for XLOOKUP, can you have the search capability for more than one column? Your example shows first name. Can it also search first and last name? Also, what happens if there's more than one result?
Yep, so you can search for more than multiple columns. You just grab those columns when you put them in there. Depending on how you set up the formula, and this is one of those things, I don't want to speak in absolutes because as we all know with Excel, different things happen the different ways you set up. So it's definitely one to play with. But if you get more than one result, you can use the transpose function, which again, it's getting even more advanced here, to kind of set it up so that it will spill down. So transpose function is one you can explore to kind of look at some of those options. Or depending on how you set it up, it might only show you the first one that it finds. So play around with it a little bit, see if you can get it to kind of return how you want it to. Look into the transpose function if you want to try to help get it to spill, because we were showing spilling across this way. Transpose can help you spill it down the rows when you have more results in there. All right, very good. So I'll pull up here. If you did have any last minute follow-up questions in here, we can always follow up with you via email there as well. All right, thank you guys, very good.
Awesome. It looks like we are all good to go. If anybody has any more additional questions, please feel free to ask us after the webinar. Thanks, Joseph. This is a lot of great information. I really appreciate it. To anybody asking in the chat if they will be getting a recording, we will be sharing this recording with you via our YouTube channel. So subscribe today if you haven't already. And if you have any questions, like I said, send them over to us. Thank you all so much for coming. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.